Welcome to the FoodClues podcast, where we dive deep into the world of holistic health and wellness, conquering your food allergies and intolerances one bite at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Alexis Sams, holistic physical therapist, food allergy specialist, but you can call me the food allergy doc. With this podcast, I'm all about helping you conquer your food allergies naturally. Through my unique FoodClues treatment approach, I've helped hundreds of people uncover the root causes of their food reactions and achieve true freedom from allergies and intolerances by identifying the missing links between their trigger foods and the underlying causes driving those triggers. In each episode, I'll be sharing the latest in my holistic health practices. I'll also be sharing transformative success stories. I'll bust some common myths surrounding healthcare and food allergy management and provide practical tips to support your healing journey. Whether you're struggling with chronic food allergies or looking for natural ways to manage other symptoms and enhance your well-being, this podcast is for you. Today's episode is packed with insights and actionable advice for better health that's right up your alley. So let's get started on the path to a happier, healthier you. So today I am finishing up the series where I break down food clues based on what you guys voted on in terms of what foods you wanted me to break down and talk about. So I actually decided that we're going to talk about gluten and dairy reactions together because I also realized I don't think I've done a video or a talk or an episode about the stem leaf comparison in terms of how I describe food clues and how I explain allergies, intolerances, reactions, and their causes. So I'm just going to jump right in and break all that down for you guys. I'm really excited to do so, and I hope you guys are excited to hear it. So let's just get right into it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is explain the plant theory. Or I guess I should say the plant-like concept. It's one of the ways that I talk to people about the food clues concept. So basically, if you think about a plant, the plant has three basic different areas. It's got your leaves or your fruit, the part that you see, the pretty part in a plant at the top. Those leaves come from stems. And you can have single stems, extending from the leaf or from the fruit, and they feed into a bigger stem. So you've got like small stems, they feed into bigger stems. And then those bigger stems essentially feed into the roots. The roots are in the soil, underground. They can grow in opposite directions. They grow in different directions than the stem and the fruit, which grows up. But they are also kind of like in the background, growing, nourishing the stem, nourishing the fruit. So the concept of food reactions, allergies, sensitivities, intolerances kind of works in that same relationship. So what do I mean by that? I mean the fruit or the leaf, the part that you see, is often the reaction that you get to your food trigger. So that can be in the context of what we're going to talk about today, your gluten and dairy allergies. Those can be a lot of times your digestive type symptoms. They can be cold and flu, or I guess I should say more allergy-like symptoms, kind of like a mucus buildup type stuff. Other types of general like pains, nausea, all the symptoms that you guys are probably familiar with, both from being or having challenges with gluten and having different challenges with dairy foods. So that's all the fruit, okay? The stems is like the important part. Actually, let me kind of like stick a pin in that. Yes, the stem is important. What's more important is being able to tell the difference between the stem and the root. That's the important part. That's the missing link, and that's the essence of food clues. Bottom line is what most people believe are the root, and therefore they're, treating it or they're trying to manage it. What they believe to be the root is actually the stem. Let me explain. So we're talking about our gluten dairy umbrella. We're talking about all the fruits, all the leaves in the gluten dairy world, all the symptoms. The stems of those would be your gut dysfunction. The stems of those would be your immune system dysfunction. If you're really working or doing your research, you might also appreciate the importance of the lymphatic system in terms of immune performance. But all of that are stems, or all of those are stems. They're important. They need to be addressed, but they are the stems and not the root. And that's where a lot of missing links are. That's where a lot of, if you've heard or if you yourself has experienced trying different treatments and they don't necessarily get that full resolution that you're looking for. They're not reducing your symptoms. You're not feeling any better. You still have, your gluten intolerance and sensitivities. You still have lactose intolerance. You still have a milk allergy. That is usually because there's a focus on the stem, which there does need to be focus on, but there's no focus on the root. So you may be wondering, okay, I get all that. So what's a root? What are my roots? I got to find my roots. Your roots, much like in a plant, they're flying under the radar. They're flying under the radar in the sense that it may be something that somebody hasn't brought to your attention. It may be something that you might have addressed in the past because you had actual symptoms showing those root causes, but those symptoms have since reduced, or they don't present themselves exactly the same way that they used to, but the root issue driving them is still very alive and well. I'll give you some heavy hitters examples of root issues or root causes that contribute to the stems, the stem dysfunctions that then can keep the fruit growing and keep your symptoms alive and kicking, even though we don't want them to. So common root issues. Underlying infections is a big one. Underlying infections is a big one because a lot of times we feel in our best interest that we've had infections in the past and that we've resolved them. Where many times, especially, when I'm working with my clients and stuff, many times I find that they still haven't been fully resolved. The symptoms may have been reduced, but the mechanisms of the underlying infection and how they affect the body is still very alive and present. And that's why you still have stem issues, and that's why you're still producing food reaction fruit. Another heavy hitter root cause would be toxicities. Toxicities can be, or I guess I should say, two aspects of toxicity would be toxicity in concept or magnitude, or toxicity in actual substance. And let me break that down for you. You may have seen my video or heard my podcast a couple of weeks ago about the bleach story. So let's use that as an example. Bleach as a toxin in the body. That would be a substance-related toxicity. We know that we're not supposed to be ingesting bleach. It is toxic to the body. Yeah, kind of plain and simple there. Toxicity as a magnitude or as a concept is basically the old adage of too much of a good thing can be bad. So you can have a toxicity of something that is supposed to be in your body, but for whatever reason, it's at an elevated level. It's at a level that is now becoming problematic for the body. Let's talk about some heavy hitters in that category. Vitamin D, big heavy hitter. Iron, big heavy hitter. Excess hormones. So things that our body needs, but for whatever reason, if they're not being used appropriately, transported, absorbed appropriately, they can rise to levels that can then cause a little bit of backfire. So underlying root issues, driving the stems, driving the fruit, we got unresolved infections and unresolved toxicities. The third major category is unresolved healing, because that can keep prolonged inflammation going. It can also keep organ performance, different chemical reactions, different body processes and cycles and responses down and out, or operating in dysfunction. So what do I mean by unresolved healing? Incomplete healing after an accident, after a physical trauma, things like incomplete healing from like concussions, bone breaks, insufficient healing from motor vehicle accidents, things like that. Another big heavy hitter is insufficient healing or cleansing the body after surgeries. So sometimes there can be tunnel vision for healing the area of the surgical process, but sometimes global healing, global cleansing, getting all the anesthesia medications, excess medications, the leftover inflammation and stuff from the surgical process itself, kind of getting all of that resolved. Sometimes that gets a little bit put on the back burner, or it's not fully resolved. And when it's not fully resolved, it's kind of left to its own devices, and it can create a situation where your body organs and your body systems, like I said, the reactions and things like that, can start to operate at a dysfunctional level. When they start operating at a dysfunctional level, how do they affect those stems? How do they affect your immune system? How does it affect your digestive system? How does it affect, all those organs and things that need to be operating, effectively and efficiently? And then if those stems again aren't addressed, then what does the fruit look like? What is the fruit produced from that? Again, that goes back to your symptoms that still lie unresolved. So I might break that down a little bit more in a future episode, but that's essentially the plant concept when we're talking about the relationship between our food reactions, our allergies, intolerances, and sensitivity, and the steps of what's driving them. So where does that put us in the context of gluten and dairy? For me, the concept is actually very simple, which is what allows me to get good turnaround with my clients when I'm working with them. The process in working through all of that, sometimes it can be easy, sometimes it requires a little bit more patience and focus, but I'm going to break it all down for you. I'm going to start with this. The one thing that all gluten and dairy related issues have in common is acid management. And let me explain that. There are differences in the fruit. There are differences in the reactions and the result of how the body is affected in a lactose intolerance versus a milk allergy. So a lactose intolerance is just that. It's an intolerance to lactase, which is based out of lactic acid, which is a term that is mostly familiar to most of you guys. Versus the milk allergy can be more related to a reaction to the whey protein in milk, difficulty managing and breaking that down. Gluten, as many of us know, is essentially a protein substance. This is a protein-related substance. And it also has like subcomponents that are also protein-based. However, I just said they all have something in common. Your lactose, your whey proteins, and your gluten being a protein compound itself. The building blocks of proteins are amino acids. So the running current of similarity between gluten and dairy issues has to do with acids. And if you realize that they have to do with acids, then you're looking for the stems, or you're looking at the stems from, or I guess I should say through acid goggles, through acid glasses, and seeing what's going on in terms of acid management, how the body is working with, relating to, handling acids as a key factor to managing the gluten dairy fruits. Yeah, or in this case, getting them under control so that they don't run rampant and grow excessively, so the symptoms don't get out of hand. So let me take it a step further. Breaking those stems down. A lot of times working with clients with gluten and dairy related issues, I end up just going back to the basic building blocks of protein metabolism. Those tend to be the stems that are being fed by the root that are then continuing to produce your symptomatic fruits. I love this plant analogy. I hope you love it too, because it makes things super crystal clear for me. So I'm going to go through the steps of basic like protein digestion and absorption, and just kind of listen as I explain and just kind of see if you start picking up on any commonalities, see if you start picking up on any patterns, okay? So proteins, which we know are basically built or mostly made of amino acids. So the first step of protein digestion, protein absorption, how the body breaks down and uses protein. The first step is with your saliva. Yeah, we try to break down the food with our saliva. So let's talk about saliva really quickly. What is saliva made of? What is saliva influenced by? It's largely influenced by your ability to absorb and use your electrolytes appropriately. And if you remember back in chemistry, if you remember that periodic table, yeah, a lot of our minerals, a lot of our electrolytes have pluses and minuses next to them. Yeah, sodium is Na with a plus sign, and potassium is K with a plus sign, and calcium is Ca with a plus sign. Your chlorine is Cl with a minus sign. So those pluses and minuses, they relate to, relate to acid-base balance. Essentially, they have a charge. They have a charge. So those pluses and minuses, you might remember, has to do with like charges, has to do with like protons versus electrons, and those protons and electron relationships basically have to do with acid-base balance. Yeah, when we just said that proteins are made of amino acids, and then lactose is based out of lactic acid. So step one in protein digestion and breakdown is using saliva to break down food. So if there's a saliva issue, if there's a saliva stem in the plant of your, food reaction garden, the plant of your food reaction garden, if there's a saliva issue related to acid-base balance, that can be one stem contributing or involved in your plant, okay? After saliva breaks down proteins, next, those proteins go to your stomach, and stomach acids further break down your proteins. So the presence and prevalence and concentration of your stomach acid can be influenced by acid-base balance. If there's an imbalance, and side note, you may also appreciate your body is always trying to look for balance. Your body is always seeking equilibrium. Equilibrium is safe. Equilibrium equals, healthy in a lot of states. So if there's an imbalance in acids and bases, sometimes that can affect the concentration of your hydrochloric acid, or it can affect the actual amount of your hydrochloric acid. So if hydrochloric acid is affected, that's another stem of that plant. And it can cause problematic protein digestion. Okay, moving on. Step 3. So we got saliva, then proteins hit our stomach, hydrochloric acid is supposed to break it down. Then we get into our intestines. We get into our small intestines. When we get to our small intestines, digestive enzymes are supposed to further help break down our proteins. What are enzymes? Enzymes are proteins too. And so what are proteins? They're made of amino acids. So again, if we have an acid-base imbalance issue, if we have an issue breaking down acids, neutralizing them, getting them out of our bodies, one of the compensations to maintain equilibrium or remain balanced may be in the form of altering the amount of digestive enzymes that your body produces and has available. So without those digestive enzymes, then we have another stem of why there may be protein digestion issues or acid digestion issues in the case of lactose intolerance. Moving on to step 5. After digestive enzymes are supposed to break down proteins in the intestines, there are transport proteins that are supposed to take those broken down components to your mucus linings, within your intestines as well. So your mucus lining, the integrity of your mucus lining, is based on good acid-base balance. If you've got too much acids coming from another source or an inability to eliminate your acids, it can break down your mucus lining. So then there's nowhere for these proteins to go. Step 5. So we did saliva breakdown, into your stomach for hydrochloric acid breakdown, into our intestines for digestive enzyme breakdown. Proteins are supposed to take those components to your mucus lining, and then after that, you're supposed to break down those proteins furthermore into their basic amino acid building blocks. But again, if your mucosa is broken down itself or problematic itself due to an acid-base imbalance, there may not be enough mucosa for that to occur. Therefore, we're again having another stem that can be related to protein digestion. We have another stem that can relate to how your body is managing an acid of some type. And then the final 2 steps. Step 6 is after the proteins are broken down into those amino acid complex and the amino acid compounds in your mucosal lining, your mucosa or those acids are supposed to be transported to your liver for further distribution to your body. That can actually bring in things like nervous system involvement. All of this does require nervous system involvement, but particularly stage 6 also has to do with specific nervous system involvement to make sure that that communication is happening, that signaling is happening between your mucosa tissue and the liver to make sure that those amino acids are sent to the liver. And then further processes are done in the liver to distribute those acids throughout the body. Step 7 is some proteins are broken down and released in fecal matter. Side note, if you're having a problem, eliminating, if you're constipated, which can happen for multiple reasons, there are multiple stems for constipation, that can be another cause or another issue for protein buildup, for difficulty managing, breaking down, eliminating proteins. So bringing all this kind of like full circle, what does all of this mean? All of this means a couple of things. One, in that plant analogy, in that plant theory, we've got multiple stems to consider. Not everybody is going to have the same problem with the same stem, or there can be different combinations of issues within those stems that all produce the fruit of dairy and gluten reactions. So the stems are very important, figuring out what stems are involved for you. And then again, looking at what roots are driving those. Do you have any leftover unresolved infections, toxicities, unresolved healing from physical traumas, accidents, surgeries, things like that? All of that is what goes into ultimately reducing and getting those symptoms under control, getting those fruit reactions under control so that they're not so triggering to you. The essence of FoodClues is how I take your symptoms. Your symptoms essentially help me narrow down the stems. Your symptoms help me identify which stems are likely the problem. I'll give you an example. We already know that you have reactions with gluten. If one of your main issues is that like intense abdominal pain, or you've already been diagnosed with SIBO or some type of digestive type issue, my antenna, my eyes might focus a little bit more on digestive enzyme breakdown. That more than likely is a powerful stem that's contributing to that fruit. And we got to get it under control. We got to treat that stem. We got to do what we got to do with it. Yeah? So that's the essence of FoodClues, is matching up your actual reactions to help me identify the stems. And then when I look further in your history and find out the root, we treat both of those. That's where the fruit starts changing. That's when the fruit stops spoiling, pain, inflammation, stuff like that, and starts producing nice fruit. Ability to tolerate these foods. And when I say tolerate, I don't necessarily mean eat them all day, every day. I get a lot of people who ask me, why are you trying to get people to eat gluten and dairy? Like gluten and dairy aren't, great to eat and things like that. Oh, so me personally, yes, I do pull back from a good amount of gluten and dairy in my life, but that's my personal choice. And I never impose my personal choices on anybody else. So if I have somebody who is seeking help and they're looking because they want to be able to eat bread, that's your choice. And I support that and I encourage that. If you don't choose to, but you still have a gluten issue or you still have a dairy related issue, that doesn't mean that when your symptoms can't be helped, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be helped. And you deserve help and assistance, in the way that you want it, in the way that uh, in the goals, to achieve the goals that you have for yourself. And I'm sorry if that sounds like a little side note, but it's always interesting when I have conversations about gluten and dairy intolerance and people are like, well, we're not really supposed to be eating those things anyway. Yeah, but I've heard cases or I've gotten messages of people who are so sensitive they can't go places because what happens if gluten gets into the air? They can't go in a bakery because what if flour, gets in the air and flour has gluten? You know, those are the benefits of still continuing the work. Those are the benefits of still resolving gluten and dairy related reactions. So, little side note there, a little deviation there. Let's go ahead and wrap things up by just talking about next steps. Yeah. So you've heard me talk about food clues, using the symptoms and the different types of reactions to identify the stems, and then looking further in your history and looking for other clues to identify your roots. That's essentially the work that I do. That's essentially how I help clients. And then we kind of work from both ends and meet in the middle. So while we look for solutions to help reduce symptoms so that you can tolerate, working through the program, working through treatments and things like that, we're also addressing the root. We're also addressing the thing that's really feeding, nourishing, driving all of this. And then we meet in the middle with the stems. So after we've addressed the thing driving it, we've calmed down symptoms a little bit, then we start tackling those stems. Then we start tackling those middlemen organs, those middlemen dysfunctions that continue to drive your reactions. So there you go, guys. That's the breakdown of dairy and gluten reactions as it pertains to food clues and as it pertains to why you may feel like you're not getting the results that you want. Let me say that in another way. If you're stuck and you're not getting the results that you want, it may be, just really driving it home, it may be that your treatment is focusing on the wrong stem. You don't have a problem with the stem that your treatment is focusing on. You may have multiple stems and they're not all being addressed. Or you may have a slight issue with all of the stems in different magnitudes. And then one more thing. If all of this sounds a little overwhelming, if all of this sounds a little confusing, if all of this sounds like, gosh, like, how am I supposed to figure this out? How am I supposed to, identify my stems and, what are my roots? And I think I might have had an old infection. If you start feeling a sense of like, oh my gosh, how am I going to figure all of this out? Let me stop you right there and let you know that it's not your job to figure it all out. Whether you reach out to me, whether you're working with your practitioner, it's your practitioner's responsibility to work this out and guide you appropriately. Yeah, if your check engine light comes on your car, you're driving down the street and the check engine light comes on. Yeah, most of us don't go into that same type of overwhelm or slight panic about, oh my gosh, my check engine light's on. Like, what could it be? Could it be the engine? Do I need an oil change? Like, oh my gosh, could it be like the transmission? I don't really know. I've got to like learn all the things about like the ins and outs of my car. No, we don't do that. We do one of two things, quite frankly. We take it to the mechanic because they are the ones knowledgeable in diagnosing the problem with the car, and then they will give you like their recommendation on what to do to fix it so that you take it to a professional. Or, unfortunately, you avoid it. You let the check engine light continue to go. This also can apply with how we kind of manage our food reactions. Much like avoiding the check engine light doesn't fix the problem that's probably going on in your car, avoiding your food triggers doesn't fix the problem either. It can be an effective mechanism to help reduce symptoms, but it doesn't address the stems. It doesn't address the roots. Yeah? So where does that leave us? That leaves us with looking for and making sure that we have a good relationship with a good practitioner to make sure that, one, you are clear on your fruits, you know exactly what your symptoms are. Two, you are very clear on your stems. And three, you are extremely crystal clear on your roots. And you're understanding the process that is going to address all of them. Regardless of what your reaction is, I know we talked about gluten and dairy today, regardless of what your food triggers is, regardless of what your reactions are, that fruit still has stems and roots that both need to be addressed. They need to be addressed from both ends, meeting in the middle. That you can guarantee. That you can bet your farm on. All right, guys? So I hope that helped. I hope that gave you some insight into breaking down the mysteries, some little mysteries related to gluten and dairy allergies. Comment if you're watching this on the podcast. Leave me a message. If you're watching this live or watching this on social media, leave me a message and let me know what are your thoughts. Yeah, what are your thoughts about the fruit plant root theory or concept? What are your thoughts about the different dimensions and things that can be going on in terms of both gluten and dairy reactions, because they can both boil down to different issues with managing acids, different issues with managing proteins. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time with some exciting insights and more discoveries using FoodClues. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the FoodClues podcast. I hope you found today's talk insightful and inspiring as you navigate your journey towards better health and wellness. Ready to take the first step in conquering your food allergies? Visit www.myfoodclues.com/quiz and take the FoodClues quiz today. In less than 5 minutes, you'll get your first food clue to identify the likely causes of your food reactions. This will be your first opportunity to uncover the hidden factors impacting your health and start your journey towards food freedom. Stay connected by following the Food Allergy Doc on Instagram. Enjoy the Food Allergy Freedom Collective on Facebook, where you'll find a supportive community and valuable resources to help you on your path to wellness. And don't forget to subscribe to the FoodClues podcast so you never miss out on an episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and share it with someone you know. Thanks for listening, and remember, your food clues are the key to conquering your food allergies. Take the quiz, join our community, and let's achieve food freedom together.